The mud pressed cold against her face as Lieutenant Junior Grade Kira O'Yelleran forced her breathing to slow. 6 inches. That was all the distance between her concealed body and the enemy boots that had stopped directly beside her position. 20 days of deep reconnaissance through hostile jungle had led to this single moment where one twitch, one exhale too loud, would end everything. The intelligence she carried in her head could save 300 American lives. The men hunting her would kill to make sure that information never reached home. And the instructors back at Coronado who swore she would never survive the first week were about to discover just how wrong they had been. 3 weeks earlier, the Naval Special Warfare Training Command baked under the California sun as Kira completed her final navigation assessment. She moved through the course with a precision that came from years of obsessive preparation, her feet finding purchase on terrain that had broken candidates twice her size. The stopwatch in Senior Chief Petty Officer Wade Brennick's hand clicked as she crossed the finish line. Before we continue with the story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you know someone who was told they could not do something and proved everyone wrong. Brennick stared at the time, without expression. Kira stood at attention, sweat soaking through her uniform, waiting for acknowledgement that never came. Around them, other SEAL candidates exchanged glances. Everyone knew what that time meant. She had just beaten the course record by 11 seconds. Brennick pocketed the stopwatch. The course was easier today, he announced to no one in particular. Humidity made the terrain more forgiving. Kira kept her eyes forward. She had learned months ago that responding to Brennick only made things worse. The senior chief had made his position clear from her first day in the program. Women did not belong in the teams. Women would get operators killed, and he would personally ensure that she understood exactly why before she rang the bell and quit like he knew she would. Chief Petty Officer Tomas Requena watched from 30 yards away, his weathered face unreadable. He had served with Kira's father 2 decades ago, back when Master Chief David O'Yelleran was considered one of the finest reconnaissance operators the Navy had ever produced. Requena remembered the daughter as a serious child who studied maps the way other kids study cartoons. He said nothing as Brennick dismissed her with a wave. That evening, Kira sat alone in the briefing room, studying satellite imagery of a jungle corridor 7,000 miles away. The mission parameters filled 3 folders marked classified. Deep reconnaissance. 21 days minimum. 4-person team inserted by submarine to map enemy positions along a corridor where Marine battalions would advance in 3 weeks. Captain Diane Whitmore entered and took the seat across from her. The captain's silver-streaked hair was pulled back tight, her uniform immaculate despite the late hour. She had flown helicopters into combat zones before taking command of Naval Special Warfare Support operations, and she understood exactly what she was asking Kira to do. "You know Brennick is going to fight this assignment," Whitmore said. Kira did not look up from the imagery. "I know. He has already filed his objection. Says you lack the experience for extended reconnaissance in hostile territory." Now Kira met her eyes. "With respect, Captain, Senior Chief Brennick would object if I requested permission to breathe." Whitmore allowed herself a small smile. She had reviewed Kira's training scores, her language certifications, her expertise in cartography and signals intelligence. On paper, Lieutenant Junior Grade O'Yelleran was exactly the operator this mission required. But paper did not account for the weight of being first, for the target painted on the back of every woman trying to prove she belonged in spaces that had excluded her kind for generations. "Your father was the best terrain analyst I ever knew," Whitmore said quietly. When he mapped a region, operators moved through it like ghosts. The intelligence he gathered saved more lives than any medal could count. Kira's hand moved unconsciously to the chain around her neck, where her father's seal trident hung beneath her uniform. "He died when I was 16, she replied. "Classified operation. Bad intelligence led his team into an ambush. That is all they ever told us." Whitmore held her gaze. "This mission matters, Lieutenant. 300 Marines are counting on accurate reconnaissance of that corridor. I need to know you can complete it." Kira thought about her father, about the folded flag they gave her mother, about the questions that haunted her for 12 years. She thought about Brennick and every instructor who looked at her and saw a quota to fill rather than an operator to forge. She thought about the young women watching to see if the door she was trying to open would stay open or slam shut forever. I will complete it, Captain. I will map every inch of that jungle, and I will bring my team home alive. Whitmore nodded and stood. Briefing is at 0600. Your team assembles tonight. After the captain left, Kira remained in the empty room, studying the terrain that would either make her reputation or end her career. Somewhere in that jungle waited answers to questions she had carried since childhood. Somewhere in that corridor, she would prove that her father's legacy lived on in more than just memory. Through the window, she watched Brennick cross the compound toward the operations building. He paused, turned, and looked directly at her through the glass. His expression carried no hatred, only the absolute certainty that she would fail. That certainty had crushed candidates far more experienced than her. Kira held his stare until he turned away. Then she returned to her maps, memorizing every contour, every elevation change, every shadow where death might hide. In 4 days, she would insert into hostile territory with 3 men who doubted her capabilities. In 21 days, she would either return with intelligence that could save hundreds of lives or become another classified casualty that no one outside this building would ever know about. Her father's trident pressed cool against her chest. She had worn it every day since her mother placed it in her hands at the funeral, a reminder of the standard she measured herself against. Now she would carry it into the same darkness that had swallowed him, and she would emerge with the truth he died trying to deliver. What she did not know, what no one at Coronado suspected, was that the same forces responsible for her father's death were already moving against her. The enemy waiting in that jungle was only half the threat. The other half wore an American uniform and had every reason to ensure she never came home. The submarine surfaced 3 miles off the coast at 0200 hours, its dark hull barely visible against the moonless sky. Kira climbed into the rigid inflatable boat alongside her 3 teammates, each of them carrying 60 pounds of gear and enough supplies for 3 weeks in hostile territory. Petty Officer 2nd Class Dex Holloway took position at the bow, his lanky frame coiled with tension as he scanned the shoreline through night vision optics. Behind him sat Petty Officers Yun and Carmichael, veterans of 4 deployments between them who had made their skepticism about this mission clear from a moment they learned who would be joining their team. Dex glanced back at Kira as the boat pushed toward shore. "Stay close and try to keep up," he said. "We are not slowing down for anyone." Kira checked her weapon and said nothing. She had heard variations of that statement from every male operator she had trained with over the past 18 months. The words meant less to her now than the rhythm of the waves against the hull. They hit the beach running, abandoning the boat in the surf and disappearing into the jungle within 90 seconds of landfall. Kira moved third in the formation, her eyes constantly tracking the terrain against the maps she had memorized. Every shadow held potential threats. Every sound demanded analysis. This was the environment her father had mastered, the darkness where he had built his legend before it consumed him. 4 hours into the insertion, Yin raised his fist and the team froze. He pointed toward a narrow game trail that cut through the undergrowth ahead. "Standard route," he whispered. "We pushed through and saved 2 hours." Kira studied the trail for 3 seconds before she spoke. "Tripwire, 6 inches off the ground, 30 meters ahead, anchored to that fallen trunk on the left." Dex raised his optics and swept the area. He lowered them slowly, his expression shifting. "She is right. How did you see that from here?" Kira was already moving to flank the trap. "I read terrain. It is what I do." They bypassed the tripwire and continued deeper into hostile territory. Nobody thanked her. Nobody acknowledged that her observation had potentially saved all their lives. But something in the silence had changed, a fraction of doubt in the certainty that she did not belong here. By dawn, they had covered 12 miles and established a concealed observation post overlooking a river crossing. Carmichael took first watch while the others rested. Kira pulled out her mapping equipment and began documenting every detail of the terrain they had crossed, her hands moving with practiced precision as she translated geography into intelligence that could guide the Marine battalions who would follow. Dex, watch your work. You always this obsessive about maps. The question carried less edge than his earlier comments. Kira continued her documentation without looking up. My father taught me that a map is a promise. Every line you draw, every elevation you mark, someone is trusting their life to your accuracy. You get it wrong, people die. Your father was military, Navy SEAL, Master Chief David O'Yelleran. He died when I was 16. Dex was quiet for a moment. I heard that name before. Legendary terrain analyst, right? Someone mentioned him during my advanced reconnaissance training. Kira's hands paused over her equipment. He could look at a satellite image and tell you where the enemy would position their forces before they even arrived. He understood how terrain shaped tactics better than anyone. Her voice softened. He used to take me hiking when I was a kid. Taught me to read the land like a language. Said the jungle would tell you all its secrets if you knew how to listen. The memory surfaced unbidden. She was 8 years old, scrambling up a rocky hillside in Virginia, while her father pointed out how water erosion created natural pathways, how vegetation patterns revealed underground springs, how the angle of shadows told stories about what lay beyond the next ridge. His patience had seemed infinite then, his knowledge bottomless. She had not understood that he was preparing her for a world he hoped she would never have to enter. What happened to him? Dex asked. Classified reconnaissance mission. His team was ambushed. Bad intelligence put them in a kill zone they should never have entered. Kira finally met his eyes. That is why I do this. Every map I make, every piece of terrain I document, I am making sure no other team walks blind into a trap that someone should have seen coming. Dex held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once and turned to check the perimeter. The gesture was small, but Kira recognized it for what it was. Not acceptance, not yet, but the beginning of something that might become respect. Day 2 brought them deeper into enemy territory. Kira's mapping revealed a hidden valley that did not appear on any satellite imagery, a natural corridor that would allow them to bypass a suspected enemy checkpoint. Yin questioned the route initially, but the valley proved exactly as she described. They saved 6 hours and avoided contact with hostile forces. That night, huddled in a concealed position while rain hammered the jungle canopy, Carmichael spoke for the first time since insertion. My cousin tried out for the teams 3 years ago, he said quietly. Washed out in Hell Week. Toughest person I ever knew, and it broke him. He looked at Kira through the darkness. You made it through the same training we did. I'm starting to think maybe Brennick does not know everything. Kira allowed herself a small smile. Senior Chief Brennick knows exactly what he knows. He just refuses to learn anything new. Carmichael chuckled softly. Yin almost smiled. Even Dex made a sound that might have been amusement. The moment passed, but something had shifted in the team dynamics. For strangers forced together by mission requirements were becoming something else. A unit that might actually trust each other when the situation demanded it. By the morning of day 3, they had covered nearly 40 miles of hostile terrain. Kira's maps documented every patrol route, every defensive position, every potential ambush site along the corridor where 300 Marines would advance in 18 days. The intelligence was building into something valuable, something that could save lives. Then she noticed the discrepancy. The enemy positions they were observing did not match the intelligence briefings from Coronado. Where the briefings predicted scattered outposts and light resistance, Kira's reconnaissance revealed fortified positions, heavy weapons emplacements, and troop concentrations 3 times larger than anticipated. She tried the satellite radio, cycling through frequencies while the team provided security. Static answered every attempt. The jungle terrain and enemy jamming had cut them off from base completely. Yin crouched beside her. How bad? Kira showed him her maps, the documented positions, the force estimates based on her observations. If these numbers are accurate, the Marine Battalion is walking into a massacre. And right now, we are the only ones who know it. The weight of that knowledge settled over the team like the humidity that clung to everything in this jungle. They were 4 operators alone in enemy territory with intelligence that could save hundreds of lives and no way to transmit it. The mission had just transformed from reconnaissance into something far more dangerous. Kira looked at her teammates, at the men who had doubted her 48 hours ago and now waited for her assessment. Whatever waited ahead, they would face it together. The enemy is dug in deeper than anyone expected, she said. We need to find out why and get this intelligence home, no matter what it costs. The argument erupted in whispers, each word carrying the weight of lives hanging in the balance. Dex wanted to abort, to turn back toward the extraction point and deliver what intelligence they had already gathered. Kira refused to consider it. We have enough, Dex insisted. We know the enemy is stronger than expected. Command can adjust the Marine advance based on what we have documented. Kira shook her head. We have fragments, partial positions, incomplete force estimates. If we turn back now, Command will have just enough information to think they understand the threat without actually understanding it. That is worse than knowing nothing at all. Yin crouched between them, his eyes scanning the jungle while they debated. She has a point. Half intelligence gets people killed just as fast as no intelligence. Carmichael checked his weapon for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. So we push deeper into territory crawling with enemy forces that outnumber us 100 to 1. What happens when they find us? We do not let them find us, Kira replied. I have been mapping their patrol patterns for 3 days. There are gaps in their coverage, blind spots created by the terrain. We can move through them if we are careful. Dex stared at her. You want to infiltrate closer to their main positions. That is suicide. That is reconnaissance. Kira met his gaze without flinching. This is what we trained for. This is why they sent us instead of a drone or a satellite. Because sometimes the only way to understand a battlefield is to walk it yourself. The silence stretched between them. Rain began to fall, fat drops that splattered against leaves and turned the ground to mud. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of vehicle engines rumbled through the jungle. The enemy was moving, repositioning, preparing for something that Kira desperately needed to understand. Carmichael spoke first. I did not survive 4 deployments by playing it safe. He looked at Kira. But I also did not survive by being stupid. You really think you can get us through their lines? I think I can get us close enough to understand what they're building out here. Close enough to give Command the intelligence they need to keep 300 Marines alive. Kira post. But I will not lie to you. The risk is real. If anyone wants to head for extraction, I will not stop them. Nobody moved. The rain intensified, drumming against the canopy in a rhythm that masked their whispered conversation from any nearby patrols. Yin finally nodded. My sister's husband is with the battalion scheduled to advance through this corridor. He has 2 kids who need their father to come home. If pushing deeper gives them a better chance, I am in. Carmichael shrugged. Already said I did not survive by playing it safe. Let us see what you can do, Lieutenant. Dex was the last to decide. He studied Kira's face for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him. You get us killed, I'm going to be very annoyed. Kira allowed herself a brief smile. Noted. They moved out 15 minutes later, pushing north toward the heart of enemy territory. Kira led them through a drainage channel that her mapping had identified as unmonitored, a natural depression in the terrain that the enemy had overlooked when establishing their patrol routes. The water rose to their waists in places cold and thick with silt, but it kept them invisible. By nightfall, they had covered another 8 miles and established a new observation post on a ridge overlooking a valley that made Kira's blood run cold. Below them, illuminated by generator-powered floodlights, an enemy base sprawled across what satellite imagery had shown as empty jungle. Hundreds of soldiers moved between prefabricated structures. Vehicle parks held armored transports and artillery pieces. Communications arrays bristled from a central command building. This was not a defensive position. This was a staging area for offensive operations. Kira documented everything, her hands steady despite the implications of what she was recording. The enemy was not preparing to resist the Marine advance. They were preparing to annihilate it. The positions she had mapped over the past 3 days were just the outer ring of a killing ground designed to funnel American forces into a crossfire from which no one would escape. Dex crawled up beside her. How many? Conservative estimate, 800 combat troops, plus support elements. Kira lowered her optics. The Marines are expecting scattered resistance from maybe 200 irregulars. They are walking into a division-strength ambush. The scale of the threat rendered their earlier debate meaningless. Partial intelligence was no longer an option. Command needed to know exactly what waited in this valley, every position, every weapon system, every avenue of approach and withdrawal. Anything less would result in a massacre. Can we get closer to the command structure? Yin asked. If we can identify their communication setup, maybe we can find a way to transmit our intelligence through their own equipment. Kira studied the layout below. The command building sat at the center of the base, surrounded by security checkpoints and constant patrol activity. Reaching it would require moving through the heart of the enemy position. The risk was exponentially higher than anything they had attempted so far. But Yin was right. Their satellite radio was useless. The only way to warn command was to find another means of transmission. And the only transmission capability in range was sitting in that command building. There might be a way, she said slowly. The terrain on the eastern approach creates a natural dead zone in their sight lines. If we time our movement with their patrol rotations, we could reach the perimeter without being detected. And then what? Dex asked. Walk through the front door. Then we find an opportunity. Kira began sketching the approach in her notebook. We did not come this far to watch 300 Marines die because we were too careful. Carmichael made a sound that might have been a laugh. Lieutenant, I'm starting to think Brennick seriously underestimated you. Kira kept her eyes on the enemy base below. Brennick underestimates everyone who does not look like him. That is why he is still a senior chief, while operators half his age are leading missions he cannot imagine. She finished her sketch and showed it to the team. Tomorrow night, we move at 0100 when their patrol patterns create a 60-second window. We get to the perimeter, find access to their communications, and transmit everything we have documented. Then we disappear before they know we were ever here. The plan was desperate. The odds were terrible. But as Kira looked at the men around her, she saw something that had not existed for days ago. Trust. They believed she could do this. They were willing to follow her into the heart of enemy territory because they had seen what she could do. She thought of her father, of the missions he had led into places just like this. He had always said that the difference between success and failure in reconnaissance was not strength or speed. It was patience, the willingness to watch and wait and understand before acting. Tomorrow they would act, and 300 Marines would either live or die based on what happened next. 7,000 miles away, Senior Chief Wade Brennick stood in the operations center at Coronado staring at a screen that showed nothing. The reconnaissance team had missed their second scheduled check-in. 48 hours of silence from 4 operators in hostile territory meant one of two things. Either their communications equipment had failed, or they were dead. Lieutenant Commander Garrett Voss entered the operations center with a tablet tucked under his arm. His uniform was crisp despite the late hour, every crease perfect, every metal aligned with geometric precision. He moved like a man who had never experienced discomfort and never intended to start. Still no contact, Voss observed. He said it like a statement of fact rather than a question. Brennick did not turn from the screen. Radio silence does not mean mission failure. Could be equipment malfunction. Could be they are maintaining communications discipline in a high-threat environment. Could be they are captured or killed. Voss stepped closer, lowering his voice. We both know this mission was compromised from the start. Sending an inexperienced female operator into deep reconnaissance was a political decision, not a tactical one. Now we are paying the price. Brennick's jaw tightened. Whatever his personal opinions about women in the teams, he did not appreciate Voss putting words in his mouth. Lieutenant O'Yelleran completed the same training pipeline as every other operator on that team. She earned her place. Did she? Voss smiled without warmth. Or did someone decide that having a female SEAL succeed would be worth more than having the mission succeed? He set his tablet on the console. I have drafted a preliminary report recommending that we classify this operation as a probable loss and redirect the Marine Battalion to an alternate route. Brennick finally turned to face him. You want to abandon 4 operators based on 48 hours of radio silence. I want to acknowledge reality and make decisions based on evidence rather than wishful thinking. Voss met his gaze steadily. The female integration program has been controversial from the beginning. When this mission fails, and it will fail, there will be inquiries, investigations. The people who authorize sending an unqualified operator into combat will face consequences. Unless we get ahead of it now. The implication hung in the air between them. Voss was offering Brennick a way out, a chance to distance himself from a decision he had opposed from the start. All he had to do was agree that the mission was lost and sign his name to a report that would bury Kira O'Yellerin's career along with her body. Brennick thought about the woman he had spent 18 months trying to break. He thought about the course record she had shattered, the skills she had demonstrated, the quiet determination that had refused to bend no matter how hard he pushed. He had wanted her to fail. He had expected her to fail. But wanting and expecting were not the same as knowing. I am not signing anything until we have confirmation, he said. Those are my operators out there. I do not write them off because it is convenient. Voss's smile faded. Suit yourself, Senior Chief. But when this goes sideways, remember that I offered you a way out. He collected his tablet and left the operations center. Brennick watched him go, something cold settling in his gut. He had served with political officers before, men who cared more about careers than missions. Voss was worse than most. There was something calculating behind those eyes, something that went beyond simple ambition. Captain Diane Whitmore arrived 20 minutes later, summoned by the missed check-ins. She reviewed the communication logs and satellite data with the focused intensity of someone who had sent people into danger before and understood the weight of that responsibility. Options, she said. Brennick pulled up the mission map. They inserted here, planned route takes them through this corridor. If they are maintaining radio silence due to enemy proximity, they could be anywhere in this 60-mile radius. And if their equipment failed, then they are continuing the mission without support, trusting that we will hold extraction protocols until they make contact. Whitmore studied the map. Lieutenant O'Yellerin's father completed a similar mission 15 years ago. Deep reconnaissance, extended duration, communications blackout for 11 days. He delivered intelligence that saved an entire battalion. Brennick said nothing. He remembered David O'Yellerin, remembered the man's reputation as someone who could read terrain the way other people read books. He also remembered how that final mission had ended the ambush that killed him and half his team. What happened to Master Chief O'Yellerin was a tragedy, Brennick said carefully. It was also a failure of intelligence that put his team in an impossible position. Yes, Whitmore turned to face him, and his daughter has spent her entire adult life making sure that failure never happens again. She is the best terrain analyst to come through this program in a decade. If anyone can complete this mission, she can. The words landed harder than Brennick expected. He had spent so long focused on what Kira represented, the political pressure, the changing standards, the threat to traditions he had devoted his life to protecting, that he had stopped seeing what she actually was. A highly skilled operator who had earned her position through the same brutal pipeline that had forged him. We hold extraction protocols, Whitmore continued. We maintain monitoring on all frequencies, and we do not write off this team until we have evidence that they are gone. She fixed Brennick with a look that left no room for argument. Is that clear, Senior Chief? Crystal clear, Captain. Whitmore nodded and turned back to the screens. Somewhere out there, 4 operators were fighting to complete a mission that could save hundreds of lives. All they could do was wait and trust that the training had prepared them for whatever they faced. Brennick thought about Voss's offer, about the easy path that would protect his career and confirm every bias he had carried into this program. Then he thought about Kira O'Yellerin's eyes when she crossed that finish line, the quiet fire that refused to accept anything less than excellence. He had wanted her to fail. He was no longer certain that he still did. Back in the jungle, Kira had no idea that her fate was being debated in air-conditioned rooms by men who had never felt mud beneath their boots. She was focused on the enemy base below, counting patrol rotations and timing guard changes with the patience her father had taught her. 60 seconds. That was the window they would have to cross 200 meters of open ground and reach the perimeter. 60 seconds to begin an infiltration that would determine whether 300 Marines lived or died. She checked her weapon one final time and looked at her team. Ready. 3 nods answered her in the darkness. Kira began to move. The infiltration fell apart in the first 30 seconds. Kira was halfway across the open ground when floodlights blazed to life without warning. Not the scheduled rotation she had timed for 3 hours. An unscheduled security sweep that caught all 4 operators exposed on terrain that offered no cover. Contact left, Dex hissed. They scattered like shadows, each operator diving for whatever concealment the ground offered. Kira pressed herself into a shallow depression that barely hid her profile, her heart hammering against the earth as boots pounded past 15 feet from her position. Shouts echoed across the compound. Searchlights swept the perimeter in overlapping arcs that left no darkness untouched. For 11 minutes, nobody breathed. The enemy patrol moved in expanding circles, checking every shadow, every irregularity in the ground. Twice Kira watched boots stop within arm's reach of her concealed position. Twice she prepared herself for the firefight that would end the mission and probably their lives. Twice the boots moved on. When the patrol finally returned to the compound, Kira counted heads and felt her stomach drop. Dex was beside her in the depression. Yin had made it to a drainage culvert 20 meters east, but Carmichael was gone. She found him 10 minutes later, dragging himself through the undergrowth with his right leg bent at an angle that made her wince. He had stepped into a hole during the scramble for cover, twisting his ankle so badly that the joint had already swollen to twice its normal size. I can still move, Carmichael insisted through clenched teeth. Just need to wrap it tight. Kira examined the injury with practiced hands. The ankle was not broken, but it was close. Carmichael could walk, barely, but the speed and stealth their mission required was no longer possible with him in the formation. We need to abort, Dex said. Get him to the extraction point and call for pickup. Carmichael shook his head. You abort, those Marines die. I did not come this far to quit because I stepped in a hole. You cannot walk, Yin pointed out. Then leave me. Carmichael's voice was steady despite the pain. Find a concealed position. Stash me with supplies. Complete the mission. Pick me up on the way out. The suggestion hung in the darkness. It was tactically sound. One injured operator hidden in a secure location while the rest of the team continued the mission. Standard procedure for exactly this situation. Kira looked at Carmichael, at the determination in his eyes and the sweat beading on his forehead from pain he refused to acknowledge. Then she looked at Dex and Yun, waiting for her decision. We split up, she said. Carmichael and Yun head for the extraction point. Slow and careful, stay off the main trails. Dex and I continue to the communications objective. Dex stared at her. 2 operators against that entire base. You have lost your mind. 2 operators are harder to detect than 4. And without Carmichael slowing us down, we can move faster and quieter. Kira began redistributing supplies from Carmichael's pack. Yin gets him to extraction and establishes contact with Coronado, if possible. We get the intelligence transmitted and link up at the rally point. Carmichael grabbed her arm. Lieutenant, this is my fault. I should have watched my footing. This is nobody's fault. Kira met his eyes. We adapt and continue. That is what we do. The team separated 30 minutes later. Kira watched Yun and Carmichael disappear into the jungle, moving south toward the extraction point at whatever pace Carmichael's ruined ankle would allow. Then she turned north, toward the enemy base and the communications equipment that represented their only hope of warning command. Dex fell in a step beside her. For what it is worth, I think you made the right call. Ask me again in 12 hours. They moved through the darkness like ghosts, using every technique Kira had learned from her father's journals and her own years of training. The enemy base hummed with activity ahead of them, hundreds of soldiers preparing for an operation that would slaughter American Marines unless someone stopped it. 3 hours into their approach, Dex broke the silence. Can I ask you something? Kira kept her eyes on the terrain. Go ahead. Back at Coronado, when Brennick was riding you harder than anyone I have ever seen him ride a candidate, you never complained. Never asked for special treatment. Never even seemed angry. How? The question surprised her. She had expected tactical concerns, doubts about their approach, criticism of her decisions, not curiosity about her psychology. My father used to say that anger is a luxury operators cannot afford, she replied after a moment. It clouds judgment, makes you reactive instead of proactive. Brennick wanted me to get angry. He wanted me to lash out so he could point to my emotional instability as proof that women do not belong in the teams. So he just swallowed it. I channeled it. Every insult, every unfair assessment, every attempt to break me became fuel. Kira paused to check a sight line before continuing. Brennick thinks he was testing my weakness. He was actually building my strength. Dex was quiet for a long moment. I was wrong about you. At the beginning, I mean. I thought you were a political appointment. Someone checking a box for the brass. I know. I should have looked at your actual record instead of assuming. Kira allowed herself a small smile in the darkness. You're looking at it now. They reached the perimeter of the enemy base as the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. The window for infiltration was closing. In 2 hours, full daylight would make any approach impossible. Kira studied the compound through her optics, searching for the gap she needed. The communications building sat at the center of the base, surrounded by security checkpoints and constant activity. But on the eastern side, where the jungle pressed close to the perimeter fence, she spotted something that made her breath catch. A drainage pipe, large enough for a person to crawl through, running directly under the perimeter fence and emerging inside the compound 30 meters from the communications building. She showed Dex. He studied the approach for a full minute before nodding. If we get caught in there, we are not getting out. And we do not get caught. Kira began moving toward the drainage pipe, her father's trident pressing cool against her chest. Somewhere beyond that fence waited the equipment that could save 300 lives. All she had to do was reach it without being discovered by 800 enemy soldiers. She thought about her father's final mission, about the intelligence failures that had killed him. She thought about Brennick and Voss and everyone who expected her to fail. Then she stopped thinking and started crawling. The drainage pipe smelled like rot and diesel fuel. Kira pulled herself through the narrow concrete tunnel inch by inch, her elbows scraping against slime-coated walls while the weight of the enemy compound pressed down above her. Dex followed 3 feet behind, his breathing controlled despite the claustrophobic darkness that swallowed them completely. 70 meters of crawling through absolute blackness. 70 meters where a single cough or scrape of equipment against concrete could bring 800 soldiers down on their position. Kira counted her movements like heartbeats, each pull forward bringing her closer to either salvation or death. The pipe ended at a rusted grate that opened into a narrow alley between storage buildings. Kira waited, listening, until she was certain no patrols were nearby. Then she eased the grate aside and slipped into the enemy compound. Dawn was breaking. Pink light spilled across the base, illuminating soldiers moving between buildings and vehicles rumbling along dirt roads. Kira and Dex pressed themselves into the shadows between 2 supply containers, invisible in the chaos of morning activity. The communications building stood 50 meters away. A 2-story concrete structure with antenna arrays bristling from its roof and armed guards flanking its entrance. Getting inside would require either a miracle or a distraction. Kira got both. A fuel truck backfired on the far side of the compound, the sound echoing like a gunshot across the morning air. Guards turned toward the noise. Soldiers shouted. For 3 seconds, every eye in the compound looked west. Kira ran. She crossed the open ground in a sprint that burned her lungs and reached the side of the communications building just as heads began turning back. Dex arrived a heartbeat later, both of them pressing against the concrete wall as their hearts hammered. A ventilation shaft near ground level offered access. Kira pried the cover free and squeezed inside, pulling herself through ductwork barely wide enough for her shoulders. The building's interior unfolded beneath her through periodic grates, offices filled with radio equipment, and soldiers monitoring communications from across the region. She found what she needed on the second floor, a room with satellite uplink capability, currently occupied by a single technician who appeared to be sleeping at his console. Kira dropped from a ventilation shaft without a sound. The technician never woke, not even when she zip-tied his hands and applied a sedative patch that would keep him unconscious for hours. Dex secured the door while Kira accessed the communications equipment. Her fingers flew across unfamiliar controls, adapting her training to foreign systems. The satellite uplink required authentication codes she did not have, but the underlying architecture was similar enough to American systems that she could bypass the primary security. Within 4 minutes, she had established a connection to a frequency monitored by Naval Special Warfare Command. The intelligence burst took 90 seconds to transmit. Every position she had mapped, every weapon system she had documented, every piece of information that could save 300 Marines from walking into a massacre. She compressed it all into a coded package and sent it screaming across the atmosphere toward Coronado. Then she added something else. A secondary message using a cipher she had learned from her father's journals, a code known only to operators from his generation. If Master Chief Solomon Adeyemi was monitoring, if anyone from her father's era was listening, they would recognize it. Spectre 7 requesting verification. Shadow Protocol compromised. Repeat, Shadow Protocol compromised. Dex watched her type the message. What does that mean? Kira stared at the screen, her mind racing through connections she had never allowed herself to make before. My father's call sign was Spectre 6. Shadow Protocol was the designation for deep reconnaissance operations during his era. And Spectre 7, what he said I would become if I ever followed in his footsteps. The transmission complete, Kira began covering their tracks. But as she worked, her eyes fell on a filing cabinet in the corner of the room. Something about the markings on its surface made her pause. A symbol stamped into the metal. A circle bisected by 3 lines. She had seen that symbol before. In her father's personal effects, on documents she was never supposed to find. Documents describing the mission that killed him. Kira crossed to the cabinet and forced the lock. Inside, she found operational files dating back 15 years. Troop movements, intelligence assessments, communication intercepts, and buried among them, a folder marked with her father's operation designation. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The documents inside told a story she had never known. Her father's final mission had not failed because of bad maps or faulty intelligence. It had failed because someone had deliberately fed false information to his team. Someone with access to American intelligence channels had betrayed the operation, had sent her father and his men into an ambush that was waiting for them. The signature at the bottom of the authorization belonged to a young officer assigned to intelligence coordination, an officer whose name she recognized because she had seen on briefing documents at Coronado just days before. Lieutenant Commander Garrett Voss. Kira felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Voss had been involved in her father's death, and now the same pattern was repeating. False intelligence assessments, underestimated enemy forces, a Marine battalion being guided toward annihilation. Dex appeared at her shoulder. Kia, we need to move. She showed him the documents. His face went pale as he read. This is not just about the Marines, Kira said, her voice barely above a whisper. Someone on our side wants this mission to fail. Someone who has been doing this for 15 years. And they just sent us into the same trap that killed my father. The sound of boots in the hallway snapped them both to attention. Voices outside the door, speaking rapidly. Someone had noticed the sleeping technician's absence from his post. Kira stuffed the critical documents into her pack and moved toward the ventilation shaft. The intelligence had been transmitted. The conspiracy had been exposed. Now all they had to do was escape from the heart of an enemy compound that was about to realize it had been infiltrated. She pulled herself into the ductwork as the door behind them burst open. Shouts filled the communications room. Alarms began to wail across the compound. The hunt was on. The ventilation shaft became a maze of wrong turns and dead ends as Kira navigated by memory and instinct. Behind her, Dex moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who had spent years learning to fight in confined spaces. Below them, the compound erupted into chaos. Soldiers flooded the communications building. Searchlights swept across every shadow. The orderly military installation had transformed into a hornet's nest, and Kira and Dex were trapped at its center. They emerged from the ventilation system onto the roof, just as a patrol rounded the corner of the building below. Kira flattened herself against the concrete, feeling the rough surface scrape her cheek while boots pounded past. The eastern sky was fully light now, their window of darkness gone completely. "We cannot go back through the drainage pipe," Dex whispered. "They will have it covered." Kira scanned the compound, her mind racing through options. The perimeter fence was 200 meters away across open ground, crawling with enemy soldiers. The main gate was obviously impossible. Every vehicle in the compound was being searched. Then she saw it, a supply truck idling near the motor pool, its canvas covering loose and flapping in the morning breeze. Two soldiers stood beside it arguing about something, their attention fixed on each other rather than their surroundings. "There," she said. They moved across rooftops, jumping gaps between buildings that made Kira's stomach lurch with each crossing. The compound sprawled beneath them like a living organism, soldiers flowing through its arteries in search patterns that grew more organized by the minute. The jump to the motor pool roof was 12 feet across and 8 feet down. Dex went first, landing in a roll that brought him up in a crouch. Kira followed, her ankle twinging as she absorbed the impact. They dropped to ground level behind a stack of fuel drums, just as the arguing soldiers finally climbed into the truck's cab. The truck began to move. Kira sprinted from cover and dove beneath the canvas, Dex landing beside her a heartbeat later. They burrowed into crates of supplies as the vehicle rumbled toward the main gate, hiding themselves among boxes of ammunition and rations. The gate checkpoint took 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours. Voices outside the canvas, boots walking alongside the truck, the distinctive sound of a rifle barrel tapping against the vehicle's frame. Kira held her breath and pressed her hand against the documents in her pack, the proof of Voss's betrayal that could expose 15 years of treason. The truck lurched forward. The voices faded. They were through, 5 miles from the compound. The truck slowed for a curve in the road, and Kira signaled Dex. They rolled from beneath the canvas and disappeared into the jungle before the vehicle completed its turn. For the first time in hours, Kira allowed herself to breathe. "We actually made it," Dex said. He was grinning despite the dirt and exhaustion that covered his face. "We infiltrated an enemy compound, transmitted intelligence, discovered a conspiracy, and escaped. That is going to be one hell of an after-action report." Kira did not share his relief. The mission was not over. Carmichael and Yun were still making their way to extraction. The intelligence had been transmitted, but she had no confirmation it was received. And somewhere at Coronado, Garrett Voss was waiting to bury everything she had uncovered. "We need to move," she said. "Rally Point is 15 miles southeast. If Yun and Carmichael made it, they will be waiting." They traveled through the day, using every concealment technique Kira knew to avoid the patrols that crisscrossed the jungle searching for the infiltrators who had violated their compound. Twice they heard helicopters overhead. Once they lay motionless for 20 minutes while a tracker team passed within 50 meters of their position. As the sun began to set, Dex broke the silence that had settled between them. "The documents you found. About your father." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "If Voss really did what those papers suggest, he is not just a traitor. He is a murderer. I know. And he is sitting at Coronado right now with access to our mission files. He knows we transmitted intelligence. If he realizes we found evidence connecting him to your father's death, he will do everything possible to make sure we never make it home. I know that too. Dex stopped walking. Kira, I need you to understand something. Whatever happens from here, I am with you. Not because of the mission or the Marines or any of that. Because you trusted me when you had no reason to, and because what Voss did deserves to be exposed. The words caught Kira off guard. 3 days ago, this man had dismissed her as a political appointment. Now, he was pledging to stand beside her against a conspiracy that had killed her father and threatened to kill them all. Why, she asked. Dex's expression was unreadable in the fading light. Because my sister tried to become a pilot when I was a kid. She had the skills, the scores, everything she needed. But someone in her chain of command decided that women did not belong in cockpits and buried her career before it started. She never recovered. Killed herself 3 years later. Kira had no words. The jungle pressed close around them, full of enemies and dangers that could end their lives at any moment. But something had shifted between them, a connection forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. Thank you, Kira said finally, for telling me. Thank her. Dex resumed walking. When we get home and nail Voss to the wall, thank her. The rally point emerged from the jungle as stars began to appear overhead. A small clearing beside a stream where they had agreed to regroup before making the final push to extraction. Kira approached cautiously, scanning for any sign of her teammates. She found Yun crouched behind a fallen log, his weapon trained on their approach until he recognized them. His face was drawn with exhaustion and something else. Something that made Kira's chest tighten with dread. Where's Carmichael? She asked. Yun's silence told her everything. Carmichael had made it 6 miles before his ankle gave out completely. Yun found him collapsed beside a stream, his face gray with pain and his legs swollen so badly that the skin had begun to split. They had no choice but to find shelter and wait for the swelling to subside. That was when the patrol found them. Yun's voice was flat as he described the firefight. Carmichael had insisted on providing covering fire while Yun escaped. He held his position for 3 minutes against a dozen enemy soldiers, buying time with every round he fired. When Yun looked back from the ridgeline, Carmichael was down and the patrol was closing in. He might still be alive, Yun said. They could have taken him prisoner. Kira knew the odds. Wounded operators captured by enemy forces rarely survived interrogation. Even if Carmichael was alive now, every hour that passed reduced his chances. And they were still 15 miles from extraction with no way to mount a rescue. Did you make contact with Coronado? She asked. Yin shook his head. Radio is still dead. Whatever jamming they have in place, it covers the entire region. Your transmission from the compound might be the only message that got through. If it got through, Dex added. The 3 of them sat in the darkness, exhaustion and grief pressing down like physical weight. Carmichael had been the first to acknowledge Kira's abilities, the first to treat her like an equal rather than an intruder. Now he was gone, sacrificed so the mission could continue. Kira pulled out her maps and began calculating. Extraction point was 15 miles southeast. Enemy patrols were concentrated to the north around the compound. If they moved fast and stayed off established trails, they could reach the coast in 18 hours. We move at first light, she said. Carmichael bought us time. We do not waste it. Yin looked up. What about him? We cannot help him if we are dead. Kira forced her voice to remain steady despite the pain in her chest. We get to extraction. We get home. We send a rescue team with proper support. That is the best chance Carmichael has. Nobody argued. They all knew she was right, even if accepting it felt like betrayal. 7,000 miles away, the intelligence burst Kira had transmitted was creating chaos at Coronado. Captain Whitmore stood in the operations center reviewing data that contradicted everything they thought they knew about the enemy presence in that corridor. 800 troops, heavy weapons, fortified positions. The Marine battalion scheduled to advance in 12 days would be annihilated if they followed their current operational plan. This changes everything, she said. We need to redirect the battalion immediately. Lieutenant Commander Voss stepped forward, his face carefully composed. With respect, Captain, we cannot verify this intelligence. The transmission came from an unsecured enemy communications system. It could be disinformation designed to disrupt our operations. The authentication codes are valid. This came from Lieutenant O'Yellerin's team, or from someone who captured Lieutenant O'Yellerin's team and extracted their codes. Voss spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. I am not saying we ignore this intelligence. I am saying we verify it before we redirect an entire battalion based on unconfirmed data. Brennick watched the exchange from across the room. Something about Voss's calm certainty bothered him. The man seemed almost eager to dismiss intelligence that could save hundreds of lives. There was a secondary transmission, Whitmore continued, encrypted with an old cipher. Our analysts are still working on it. For the first time, Voss's composure flickered. What cipher? Before Whitmore could answer, the operations center door opened and a figure stepped through that made Brennick straighten instinctively. Master Chief Solomon Adeyemi moved with the deliberate grace of a man who had survived more combat than most operators would ever see. His limp was pronounced today, a reminder of the wounds that had ended his active career, but his presence still commanded immediate respect. That cipher, Adeyemi said, is one I taught to David O'Yellerin 20 years ago. His voice was deep and weathered, and the message it contained is one that only his daughter would know to send. Whitmore turned to face him. You decoded it. Spectre 7 requesting verification. Shadow protocol compromised. Adeyemi's eyes found Voss across the room. Shadow protocol was the designation for a series of deep reconnaissance operations that I commanded in the early years of my career. Operations that were systematically betrayed by someone with access to our intelligence channels. The room went silent. Brennick saw Voss's hand move almost imperceptibly toward his sidearm. David O'Yellerin died on one of those operations, Adeyemi continued. He and I spent years trying to identify the source of the leaks. He was getting close when he was killed. His daughter just sent me a message telling me that she found what her father was looking for. This is absurd, Voss said. His voice remained calm, but sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. You are suggesting a conspiracy based on a coded message from an operator who may already be dead or captured. I am suggesting that someone in this room has been betraying American operators for 15 years. Adeyemi took a step toward Voss. And I am suggesting that the intelligence Lieutenant O'Yellerin transmitted is accurate, because the same person who wants to discredit it is the same person who has been feeding false information to our enemies. Voss moved fast, his hand closing on his sidearm and bringing it up in a smooth motion that spoke of training most intelligence officers never received. But Brennick moved faster. 20 years of combat reflexes sent him across the room in a blur, his hand closing on Voss's wrist before the weapon could level. The struggle lasted 3 seconds. When it ended, Voss was on the ground with his arm twisted behind his back and Brennick's knee planted between his shoulder blades. I would very much like to hear you explain this, Brennick said. Voss said nothing, but the look in his eyes as Adeyemi stood over him was answer enough. Back in the jungle, Kira had no knowledge of what was unfolding at Coronado. She only knew that every mile between her and extraction felt like 10, that her body was running on reserves she did not know she had, and that somewhere behind her, Carmichael was either dying or already dead. Dawn broke over the jungle canopy as they pushed through terrain that seemed designed to slow them down. Ravines that required careful descent. Rivers swollen with recent rain. Undergrowth so thick that every step required effort. By midday, Dex was limping from a wound he had not mentioned, blood seeping through a makeshift bandage on his left thigh. By evening, Yin was running a fever from contaminated water they had been forced to drink. And Kira felt her own body beginning to fail, muscles screaming for rest that she could not afford to give them. 5 miles from extraction, she stopped and listened. The jungle had gone quiet in a way that made her skin prickle with warning. Contact, she whispered. Enemy soldiers emerged from the undergrowth like ghosts, cutting off their path to the coast. Kira counted 12 soldiers spreading into a search line that would sweep directly through their position within minutes. Their weapons were raised, their movements coordinated, their eyes scanning the jungle with the focus of men who knew their prey was close. She looked at Dex, at the blood still seeping through his bandage. She looked at Yun, his face flushed with fever and his hands trembling on his weapon. Neither of them could run. Neither of them could fight effectively, and she could not carry them both. The decision crystallized in her mind with terrible clarity. "I'm going to draw them off," she whispered. "Head east when they follow me. The extraction point is 5 miles straight line from here." Dex grabbed her arm. Branches whipped her face. Her lungs burned, and her legs screamed for rest. But she kept running, drawing the enemy deeper into the jungle, buying Dex and Yun the time they needed to escape. She made it 400 meters before her foot caught a root and sent her tumbling down a steep embankment. She rolled through mud and rocks, her weapon flying from her hands, her body slamming against a boulder that knocked the breath from her lungs. When she opened her eyes, enemy soldiers were surrounding her position at the top of the embankment. This was it. 21 days of reconnaissance, a lifetime of training, generations of legacy, all ending in a muddy ravine thousands of miles from home. Kira thought of her father, of his final moments facing the same enemies in the same jungle. She thought of her mother, waiting for news that would never come. She thought of Brennick and everyone who said she would fail. At least she had completed the mission. At least the intelligence had been transmitted. At least 300 Marines would live because she had refused to quit. The soldiers began their descent. And then the sky exploded. Helicopter rotors thundered overhead as an MH-60 Seahawk roared over the ridgeline, its door gunners opening fire on the enemy position. Soldiers scattered for cover as rounds tore through the jungle canopy. A second helicopter appeared moments later, laying down suppressive fire that drove the enemy back from the embankment. Kira stared in disbelief as a figure rappelled from the lead helicopter, boots hitting the ground 30 feet from her position. Chief Petty Officer Tomas Recana moved toward her with his weapon raised, covering the approaches while the helicopters kept the enemy pinned. He reached down and hauled her to her feet. "Can you walk?" Kira found her voice. "How?" "Your transmission got through." Recana pulled her toward the hovering helicopter. "Whole damn base has been in an uproar for 6 hours. Captain Whitmore sent everything we had the moment we confirmed your position. Dex and Yun, they're east of here, 500 meters. Already being extracted." Recana helped her grab the rescue hoist. "Your team is going home, Lieutenant." The hoist lifted her into the helicopter as enemy fire crackled through the air below. Hands pulled her inside, strapped her into a seat, pressed a canteen into her shaking grip. Through the open door, she watched the jungle shrink away, the enemy compound disappearing into the green expanse that had nearly claimed her life. Dex was already aboard, his leg wound being treated by a medic. Yun sat beside him, and four drip in his arm, fighting the infection that had been spreading through his system. They were battered. They were broken. But they were alive. Recana settled into the seat across from her. The noise of the rotors made conversation nearly impossible, but he leaned close to shout in her ear. "There is something else you should know. We found Carmichael." Kira's heart stopped. Alive. Barely. Enemy patrol was moving him to an interrogation site when we hit them. He took 2 rounds, but he is stable. Going to lose the leg, probably, but he's going to make it. Tears she did not know she had been holding spilled down Kira's cheeks. She had been prepared to die. She had made peace with that outcome. But learning that her entire team would survive, that her sacrifice play had bought them the time they needed while rescue forces closed in, broke something loose inside her that she had kept locked away since the mission began. Dex reached across the helicopter and gripped her hand. "We made it. We made it," she repeated. The helicopter banked east toward the coast where a Navy ship waited to carry them home. Behind them, the jungle faded into memory. Ahead lay debriefings and medical evaluations and questions she would spend weeks answering. But for now, in this moment, Kira allowed herself to feel something she had not permitted since her father's funeral. Hope. Recana was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. When they landed on the ship, He helped her down from the helicopter and walked beside her toward the medical bay. Just before they reached the hatch, he stopped and faced her. "Your father would be proud," he said. "I served with David O'Yelleran for 6 years. He was the finest operator I ever knew. And I'm telling you right now, you are every bit as equal." Kira touched the trident hanging beneath her uniform. "Thank you, Chief. Do not thank me. Thank whoever trained you to be this good." Recon smiled for the first time since she had known him. "And thank whatever stubborn streak made you refuse to quit when everyone told you that you would fail." He disappeared through the hatch, leaving Kira alone on the deck with the salt wind in her face and the knowledge that she had accomplished something nobody thought possible. 21 days in hostile territory. Intelligence that would save 300 lives. A conspiracy exposed. A father's legacy honored. And she was just getting started. Kira woke in a hospital bed at Naval Medical Center, San Diego, with no memory of how she arrived. 3 days had passed since the extraction. Her body had finally surrendered to exhaustion somewhere over the Pacific, and the medical staff had kept her sedated while they treated dehydration, malnutrition, and a dozen minor injuries she had not noticed accumulating during 21 days in the jungle. The first face she saw was Dex Holloway, sitting in a wheelchair beside her bed with his wounded leg elevated and a grin spreading across his face. "Sleeping Beauty finally wakes up," he said. "I was starting to think you planned to skip all the fun parts." Kira pushed herself upright, wincing at muscles that protested every movement. "What did I miss? Where do I start?" Dex ticked off items on his fingers. Voss is in custody awaiting court-martial. The Marine Battalion was redirected and completed their advance without a single casualty. Carmichael is out of surgery and already complaining about the hospital food. And you have approximately 47 messages from Captain Whitmore asking when you will be well enough for debriefing. The information washed over her in waves. Voss in custody. The Marines safe. Carmichael alive. Everything they had fought for, everything they had nearly died for, had actually worked. "What about the documents I found?" Kira asked. "The connection to my father's mission." Dex's expression sobered. "Naval Criminal Investigative Service has them. They have opened a full investigation into Voss's activities going back 15 years. Turns out your father was not the only operation he compromised. There are at least 6 other missions where the intelligence failures match the same pattern. 6 operations. Dozens of lives lost. 15 years of betrayal hidden behind a spotless service record and political connections." Kira felt anger rising in her chest, hot and sharp. How did no one notice? Because he was careful, and because the people who might have connected the dots kept dying on missions he helped plan. Dex leaned forward in his wheelchair. "But you survived, and now everything he built is coming apart." A knock at the door interrupted them. Captain Whitmore entered, followed by a figure whose presence made Kira straighten instinctively despite her injuries. Master Chief Solomon Adeyemi looked exactly as she remembered from her father's funeral. Older now, but still carrying himself with the quiet authority of a man who had earned respect in ways most people could not imagine. His eyes found hers and held them with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Lieutenant O'Yelleran," he said, "it is long past time we had a proper conversation." Whitmore excused herself, taking Dex with her despite his obvious reluctance to leave. When the door closed, Adeyemi lowered himself into the chair beside Kira's bed with the careful movements of a man whose body had paid the price for decades of service. "You knew my father," Kira said. "Why did you never reach out?" "All those years, I had no idea you existed. Because I was hunting the man who killed your father." Adeyemi's jaw tightened. "I knew there was a traitor, but I could not prove it. Every time I got close, the evidence disappeared or the witnesses died. When you sent that coded message, when I saw Spectre 7 requesting verification, I knew you had found what I had been searching for. The documents in the filing cabinet. Voss's signature on the authorization that sent my father into an ambush. That signature connects Voss to deliberate intelligence manipulation on at least 7 operations." Adeyemi leaned forward. "Your father spent the last year of his life building that case. He was going to expose Voss when he returned from his final mission. Voss found out, and made sure he never came back. The truth settled over Kira like a physical weight. Her father had not simply died. He had been murdered by a man who wore the same uniform, who had shaken hands with his fellow operators while sending them to their deaths. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we finish what your father started." Adeyemi reached into his jacket and withdrew a worn leather journal. "I have been adding to this for 15 years. Every suspicious intelligence failure, every mission that went wrong in ways that should have been prevented, combined with the documents you recovered, it creates a picture that no court-martial can ignore." He placed the journal in her hands. The leather was soft with age, the pages filled with handwriting that shifted from David O'Yellerin's precise script to Adeyemi's heavier hand. A record of betrayal compiled by two men who refused to let the truth stay buried. "Your father wrote the first entries," Adeyemi said. "He wanted you to have this when the time was right. I think he always knew you would be the one to finish the mission he started." Kira opened the journal to the first page. Her father's handwriting stared back at her, a message written 16 years ago. "For Kira, when she is ready, the truth matters. Never stop fighting for it." The tears came then, silent and unstoppable. Adeyemi sat with her while she cried, offering no words of comfort because none were needed. He simply waited, the way her father would have waited, until the grief had run its course, and what remained was something harder. Resolution. "I want to testify at the court-martial," Kira said. "I want to look Voss in the eye and tell him exactly what his betrayal cost. You will have that chance." Adeyemi rose from his chair. "But first, there's something else. Captain Whitmore has recommended you for the Silver Star based on your actions during the reconnaissance mission. The award ceremony is scheduled for next month." Kira shook her head. "I do not need medals." "No, you do not. But the women who come after you need to see that excellence is recognized regardless of gender." Adeyemi moved toward the door. "Your father received the Navy Cross posthumously for his final mission. The recommendation was buried by Voss for 15 years. That is being corrected. You will receive your medal on the same day your father finally receives his." He paused at the threshold. "Spectre 6 and Spectre 7, he said quietly. Side by side, the way it always should have been. Then he was gone, and Kira was alone with her father's journal and the knowledge that everything she had fought for was finally coming to fruition. The court-martial of Lieutenant Commander Garrett Voss lasted 11 days. Kira testified on the third day, sitting in the witness chair with her dress whites immaculate and her father's trident hidden beneath her uniform. She looked directly at Voss as she described the documents she had found, the pattern of betrayal stretching back 15 years, the deaths that could be laid at his feet. Voss stared back at her with the cold calculation of a man who had spent his career manipulating others. He showed no remorse, no acknowledgement of the lives he had destroyed. When his defense attorney suggested that Kira's testimony was motivated by personal vendetta rather than pursuit of justice, she kept her voice steady. "My father was murdered by a man he trusted," she said. 17 other operators died because of intelligence failures this defendant deliberately caused. I am not here for vengeance. I am here because the truth matters and because no one else should ever die, because Garrett Voss decided their lives were worth less than his career." The courtroom was silent when she finished. Even Voss's attorney had nothing to say. Master Chief Adeyemi testified the following day, presenting 15 years of documented suspicions and the journal he had compiled with David O'Yellerin. The evidence was overwhelming. Communications intercepts showed Voss passing classified information to foreign contacts. Financial records revealed payments hidden in offshore accounts. Former colleagues testified to irregularities they had noticed but never reported. On the 11th day, the military jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Voss was sentenced to life imprisonment at the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth. As he was led from the courtroom in shackles, he passed within 3 feet of Kira's seat. He paused, leaning close enough that only she could hear his words. "Your father begged at the end, just like you would have if those helicopters had arrived 5 minutes later." Kira met his eyes without flinching. "My father completed his mission. So did I. You failed at everything you ever attempted, And now you will spend the rest of your life knowing that a woman you tried to destroy is the reason you are in chains. Vasa's composure cracked for just a moment, rage flickering across his features before the guards pulled him away. Kira watched him go and felt something she had not expected. Peace. The weeks following the court-martial brought changes Kira had not anticipated. Senior Chief Brennick requested a meeting with her, arriving at her temporary quarters at Coronado with an expression she had never seen him wear. Uncertainty. Kira considered the man who had made her life miserable for 18 months. The easy response would be anger. The satisfying response would be dismissal. But she had learned something during 21 days in the jungle about the difference between enemies and obstacles. "You are not the first person to underestimate me," she said. "You will not be the last. What matters is what you do now." Brennick nodded slowly. "I have requested assignment as an advisor to the female integration program. I figure if I spent 18 months trying to break female candidates, I should spend at least that long helping them succeed." The admission cost him something. Kira could see it in the tension around his eyes, the stiffness of his posture. Senior Chief Wade Brennick was not a man who apologized easily or admitted mistakes willingly. She extended her hand. "Then I look forward to working with you, Senior Chief." His grip was firm when he shook it. "So do I, Lieutenant." 3 days before the award ceremony, Kira visited Carmichael at the rehabilitation center where he was learning to walk with his new prosthetic leg. He had lost the limb below the knee, but his spirit remained unbroken. When she entered his room, he was arguing with a physical therapist about being allowed to attempt stairs. "Lieutenant," he called out when he saw her, "tell this woman that SEALs do not take elevators." The therapist rolled her eyes. "Tell your lieutenant that SEALs who rush their rehabilitation end up back in surgery." Kira smiled and took a seat beside his bed. "How are you really doing?" Carmichael's expression softened. "Some days are harder than others. Phantom pain is a real thing, turns out. But every time I feel sorry for myself, I remember that I almost did not make it out of that jungle at all." He looked down at the space where his leg used to be. "Small price to pay for completing the mission. You saved Yun's life." Kira leaned forward. "You told me what happened. You held that position when you could barely stand. That is not a small thing. Neither is what you did." Carmichael met her eyes, leading us through that compound, transmitting the intelligence, drawing off those soldiers so Dex and Yun could escape. "You know what the guys are calling you now." Kira shook her head. "Spectre 7. Carmichael grinned. "Word got out about the coded message you sent. Everyone knows you are David O'Yellerin's daughter now, and everyone knows you lived up to the name." The weight of that legacy settled over her shoulders, familiar now rather than crushing. She had spent her entire adult life trying to honor her father's memory. Now she had done something more. She had added to it. The night before the ceremony, Kira sat alone in her quarters reading her father's journal for the 100th time. His words filled page after page, observations about terrain analysis, reflections on leadership, notes about operations that had tested his limits. But scattered among the professional entries were personal messages addressed directly to her. "I watched you learn to read a map today. You were 6 years old, and you understood contour lines faster than operators twice your age. I knew then that you would surpass me someday. I'm so proud of the woman you are becoming. Whatever path you choose, know that my love goes with you. If you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. Do not let grief consume you. Honor my memory by living fully, by fighting for what matters, by never accepting limits others try to place on you." Kira closed the journal and pressed it against her chest. Tomorrow she would stand beside her father's memory and receive recognition for what they had both accomplished. Tomorrow the world would know that David O'Yellerin's legacy lived on in his daughter. Tonight, she simply missed him. A knock at her door broke the silence. Dex stood in the hallway, dressed in civilian clothes with his leg brace visible beneath his jeans. "Could not sleep either," he said. Kira stepped aside to let him in. "We should probably try. Big day tomorrow." Dex settled into a chair across from her. "I have been thinking about my sister, about what she might have become if someone had given her the chance you got." He paused. "I think she would have been proud of what we accomplished out there. Kira thought about all the women who had been told they did not belong, all the doors that had been closed, all the potential that had been wasted because of assumptions and prejudice. Then we make sure it meant something, she said. We make sure the doors stay open. Dex nodded. Deal. They sat together in comfortable silence until exhaustion finally claimed them both. The ceremony took place on a perfect California morning, the kind of day that made Naval Special Warfare Command look like a recruitment poster. 200 people filled the seats arranged before the outdoor stage. A mix of active duty personnel, veterans, families, and dignitaries who had come to witness history. Kira stood at attention in her dress whites, her medals gleaming in the sunlight, and her father's trident pressed against her heart beneath the fabric. Beside her, an empty space had been reserved, a symbolic position for the man who should have stood there 16 years ago. Master Chief Solomon Adeyemi delivered the opening remarks, his voice carrying across the assembly with the authority of a man who had earned every word he spoke. We gather today to recognize extraordinary courage and sacrifice, he began, to honor those who went beyond the call of duty in service to their nation, and to correct an injustice that should never have been allowed to stand. He spoke of David O'Yelleran first, describing the mission that had claimed his life and the intelligence he had transmitted before the ambush closed around him. He spoke of the conspiracy that had sent him into danger and the 15 years of silence that had followed. He spoke of a daughter who had grown up in her father's shadow and emerged to cast her own light. Master Chief David O'Yelleran gave his life, completing a mission that saved an entire battalion, Adeyemi said. His sacrifice was buried by a traitor who feared what his success represented. Today, we restore his honor. Captain Whitmore stepped forward carrying a display case. Inside, the Navy Cross gleamed against dark velvet, the nation's second highest award for valor finally reaching the family of the man who had earned it. Kira's mother sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she watched her husband receive the recognition he had been denied for 16 years. When Whitmore presented her with the medal, she clutched it against her chest and whispered words that only she and her husband's memory could hear. Then it was Kira's turn. Adeyemi read the citation, describing 21 days of deep reconnaissance in hostile territory, the infiltration of an enemy compound, the transmission of intelligence that had saved 312 Marines, and the exposure of a conspiracy that had cost American lives for over a decade. Lieutenant Junior Grade Kira O'Yelleran demonstrated exceptional courage, tactical brilliance, and unwavering dedication to her mission and her teammates, he read. Her actions reflect the highest traditions of the United States Navy and the Naval Special Warfare community. Captain Whitmore pinned the silver star to Kira's chest. The weight of it felt insignificant compared to the weight of everything that had led to this moment. But when she looked out at the assembled crowd and saw her teammates watching, Dex on crutches and Ewan standing at attention, and Carmichael in his wheelchair with his new prosthetic leg gleaming, she understood what the medal really represented. Not personal glory. Proof. Proof that women could serve at the highest levels of special operations. Proof that excellence transcended gender. Proof that the doors her father had helped open would never close again. Kira was invited to speak. She approached the podium and looked out at the faces before her, some familiar and some strange, all united in this moment of recognition. 16 years ago, I lost my father to a mission that should have brought him home a hero, she began. Instead, his sacrifice was buried by a man who valued his own advancement over the lives of American service members. I grew up believing that my father had failed, that the mission had failed, that his death was meaningless. She paused, steadying herself. I was wrong. My father succeeded. He completed his mission and transmitted intelligence that saved lives, just as he had done throughout his career. What failed was not my father. What failed was the system that allowed a traitor to operate unchecked for 15 years. Her eyes found Brennick in the crowd. The senior chief sat rigidly at attention, his expression unreadable. I did not complete this mission alone. I had teammates who trusted me when they had every reason not to. I had commanders who gave me opportunities others would have denied. And I had a father whose example taught me that the only failure is giving up. She looked at her mother, at Adeyemi, at the empty space beside the podium where her father should have stood. The Navy Cross my father receives today does not bring him back. The Silver Star I wear does not undo the suffering our team endured, but they represent something more important than medal and ribbon. They represent truth. They represent justice. And they represent a promise that what happened to my father will never happen again. Kira stepped back from the podium as applause filled the morning air. Her mother rose and crossed to embrace her, both of them holding each other while 16 years of grief and uncertainty finally found resolution. The reception afterward brought moments Kira would remember for the rest of her life. Carmichael demonstrating his new leg by attempting an ill-advised dance move. Yin laughing for the first time since the jungle. Dex introducing her to his parents and watching his mother cry when she learned how her daughter's memory had shaped his transformation. Brennick approached near the end, standing awkwardly at the edge of the celebration until Kira noticed him. "Senior Chief," she said, "I did not expect you to stay. I wanted to say something." Brennick's voice was gruff, uncomfortable. "What you said up there, about the system failing. You were right, and I was part of that system. You were also part of taking it down." Kira remembered the reports she had read, how Brennick had subdued Voss when the traitor reached for his weapon. "You stopped him when it mattered. Does not erase what came before." "No, but it matters what comes after." Brennick nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. "Then I better make sure what comes after is worth something." He walked away, and Kira watched him go with the strange certainty that Senior Chief Wade Brennick would never again be the man who had tried to break her. 6 weeks later, Kira returned to the jungle, not as a candidate proving herself, but as a team leader training the next generation of special operators. Her squad included 2 female candidates, the largest number ever assigned to a single reconnaissance unit. She led them through terrain analysis exercises, teaching techniques her father had developed and she had refined. She pushed them hard but fairly, demanding excellence without prejudice. And when one of the candidates, a young woman named Torres, asked how she had survived 21 days in hostile territory, Kira gave her the same answer her father had given her years ago. "You read the terrain. You trust your training. And you never, ever quit." Torres nodded, determination burning in her eyes. The same determination Kira had carried through the pipeline, through Brennick's harassment, through the jungle that had tried to kill her. The cycle continued. The legacy grew, and somewhere, Kira knew her father was watching. If you connected with this story, drop a comment below and share your favorite moment. Or tell us about someone you know who refused to quit when everyone expected them to fail. Your stories matter just as much as the ones we tell here. Kira touched the trident beneath her uniform one final time, feeling its familiar weight against her heart. Then she turned back to her candidates and continued the work her father had started. Spectre 6 and Spectre 7, father and daughter, past and future. The mission continued.